Picture an avoidant partner like a fortress that has spent years refining its walls. Every stone, childhood disappointments, relationship betrayals, social pressures has been laid with military precision. When most people look at those walls, they assume the only motive is fear. And yes, fear is there, but when genuine love enters the picture, something astonishing happens. Those same walls begin to move. They don't crumble. That would feel too unsafe. Instead, the fortress quietly redesigns its architecture around you. The distance is still visible, but it shifts from reflexive defense to calculated strategy. Think of a chess grandmaster who once played only to protect the king. Now the very same moves are crafted to create lines of sight toward the queen. In psychological terms, a classic avoidant protects their sense of autonomy as if it were oxygen. Love appears to threaten that autonomy because intimacy seems to require surrender. But a deeper truth cracks the surface. Autonomy is not the opposite of connection. It is the precondition for a connection that feels voluntary and therefore safe. Once the avoidant senses that you respect their right to step back, they begin using distance not to flee but to breathe. Each pause in communication becomes a controlled exhale, a moment to metabolize an emotion they have almost no language for. Watch closely, and you'll see the timing change. Their disappearances grow shorter, almost rhythmic, like a diver who must return to the surface more often than before because the treasure below has suddenly become too captivating to abandon. Philosophically, this shift mirrors the tension between the Apollonian and Dionysian impulses that Nietzsche wrote about. The Apollonian side, order, boundaries, self-mastery, has long dominated your avoidance inner kingdom. Love is Dionysian, chaotic, intoxicating, unpredictable. The first sign of transformation is not a surrender of order, but a renegotiation. The avoidant allows a touch of chaos in, but only within a perimeter they can redraw on the fly. That is why their texts may arrive at odd hours, or why they may propose encounters framed as casual or brief. These overtures are not meaningless, they are field tests. They are mapping the territory where autonomy and intimacy can coexist without either one dying of suffocation. Here's the paradox you must seize. Their strategic retreat is actually progress. Most people misread silence as indifference, assuming the relationship is flatlining. In reality, the avoidant is performing an emotional audit, calculating how much closeness they can sustain before their nervous system snaps back into survival mode. They step away to preserve the fragile possibility of stepping closer tomorrow. Your job is to hold your emotional ground without chasing, because pursuit only confirms their old script that love equals captivity. When you demonstrate that you can let the distance breathe without panicking, you become the first person who proves intimacy can happen without intrusion. That single experience rewrites years of subconscious programming more effectively than 100 declarations of affection. Notice too how their language changes after every strategic retreat. At first you'll get neutral status updates, safe, surface level. The moment love begins to rewrite the script, the updates contain micro confessions. I was thinking about what you said. I remembered that cafe you like. I wanted your opinion on something. Each message is a breadcrumb of vulnerability wrapped in plausible deniability. They may not be ready to serve the whole meal, but they're inviting you into the kitchen. To the untrained eye, those crumbs look random. To the attuned eye, they are laser targeted, selected facts meant to test whether you can honor the depth behind the trivia. This is why patience isn't passive, it's precision. You are not waiting for them to change. You are witnessing them restructure the very mechanisms they once used to keep you out. Every measured step back is an investment in a future step forward. If you can recognize that pattern, you stop feeling abandoned and start feeling entrusted. And when someone grants you access to the blueprints of their defenses, you are no longer just a guest in their life, you are a co-architect of their freedom. So when you see the distance reappear, don't ask, why are they leaving? Ask, what new room are they building for us? Understanding that difference turns confusion into clarity, doubt into power, and fear into the rarest currency of all. Patient, conscious love, eager to grow rather than run. The walls are moving. Stand still long enough to notice, and you'll discover they're moving toward you. You want to know the truth about an avoidant in love? You'll never hear it from their mouth first. You'll see it leak out of them in ways they don't even know how to control. Because love for an avoidant is not expressed, it's leaked. It escapes through the cracks they can't seal fast enough. The most telling sign, their eyes, their stare. That's that one unguarded moment when they look at you a second too long, and the emotional fortress they built for decades flickers like a light bulb under too much current. Avoidants don't fall in love the way others do. They don't announce it. They don't shout it from rooftops or post it on Instagram. They tremble through it. Love to them is an emotional ambush. It's like suddenly being underwater in a world they thought was air. And that stare, the one you caught when they thought you weren't watching, that's not a gaze of peace. It's internal panic. It's someone realizing they've been pierced, not by a weapon, but by something far more dangerous, intimacy. From a psychological perspective, that stare is a trauma response colliding with hope. The avoidant has trained their nervous system to associate closeness with entrapment. Their entire inner world is built around managing control. Control of their space, control of their emotions, control of their exposure. But love is the ultimate wild card. It can't be predicted, and more importantly, it can't be controlled. So when love hits an avoidant, you're not watching a person enjoy emotional safety. You're watching a system go into shock. And that's why their eyes will say what their words won't. That flicker in their expression is a crack in their psychological armor. Their jaw may tighten, their posture may stiffen, they might even look away quickly, but make no mistake, what you saw in that one moment was real. Realer than any I love you forced through clenched lips. Because the avoidant doesn't declare love, they endure it. Now let's go deeper. Philosophically, love for an avoidant is a confrontation with the self. They've spent most of their life splitting, keeping their public self clean, composed, controlled, while exiling the emotional self into a locked room. But when they fall in love, that emotional self starts kicking the door down. That's the battle playing out in their eyes when they look at you. It's not just, do I love this person? It's what part of me am I going to have to resurrect to love this person fully? And that question terrifies them because the buried parts are often tied to pain, vulnerability, and the memories they promised themselves they'd never relive. So when you're sitting across from an avoidant and you catch them staring in silence, don't rush to fill the space. That silence is sacred. That's not awkwardness, that's awakening. Their mind is scrambling for defense, but their body is already speaking the truth. You've bypassed their logic and touched their nervous system, and the body never lies. Here's where most people make the mistake. They try to decode the avoidant with logic. They wait for verbal confirmation, for consistent texting, for overt reassurance. But an avoidant in love doesn't work in sentences. They work in split seconds. Micro movements, flinches, delayed responses, lingering glances followed by self-correction. They're not playing games. They're navigating a storm of emotions they were never taught how to handle. And the real kicker? They hate that you can see it. Vulnerability is exposure. And exposure is what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. But here's the paradox. The more they try to suppress what they feel, the louder it becomes in their body language. Their silence shouts. Their detachment bleeds emotion. And their stare, it screams what their lips will never dare say. You got inside, I don't know how. I don't know what to do with it, but I feel you. So the next time you see that flicker in their eyes, don't doubt it. Don't minimize it. Recognize it for what it is. The soul of someone who has never felt safe enough to love, finally peeking out from the shadows. They won't tell you they're in love with words. They'll confess it in glances, unguarded, unplanned, undeniable. Learn to see what's being said in the silence. One of the most paradoxical and misunderstood behaviors of an avoidant in love is that they'll try to devalue you, not because they don't care, but because caring too much threatens the very identity they've spent years protecting. This is where most people get confused. You think, why is he pulling away when I've been nothing but good to him? Why does he act like I'm replaceable one day, then seem obsessed with my energy the next? The truth is, you become a mirror, and what he sees in you disrupts the image he has of himself. He doesn't think he deserves what he feels, so he fights it, and in the process, he fights you. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. An avoidance core belief, one usually developed in early relationships, sometimes as far back as childhood, is simple but deeply rooted. Intimacy equals loss of control. So when someone starts getting close, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, they go into a primal defense mode. But when they fall in love, that defense gets more complex. It's no longer just about protecting space, it becomes about managing the contradiction. I crave this person, but if I admit that, I lose control. So I have to push them down in my mind, even if I'm elevating them in my heart. This is why you'll often experience a bizarre emotional whiplash. They'll show deep interest, curiosity, affection, then suddenly criticize you, minimize your value, or even ghost you. And yet, during their silence, they obsess. They reread messages. They check your social media without liking a thing. They remember everything you said with forensic precision. Why? Because you're not just a person to them anymore. You're a trigger for transformation. And the part of them that wants to stay the same will do whatever it can to convince their mind that you're too much, too emotional, too available, or too intense. But it's not you they're rejecting. It's the terrifying possibility that someone might see the real them and choose to stay. Let's take this deeper. Philosophically, this battle they fight is between ego and essence. The ego says, stay guarded, stay safe, stay in control. But the essence, the part of them buried under fear, knows that connection is the very thing they need to evolve. You, as the person they love, become both a threat and a key. That's why their behavior seems irrational. The ego is trying to protect the system, while the soul is screaming for release. And when those two forces collide, it looks like confusion, inconsistency, even cruelty. But underneath, it's the sound of someone breaking. What's wild is that their attempt to devalue you is actually a reverse confession. It's them saying, you've impacted me more than I can process. You've disrupted my detachment. You've made me feel something real. They think if they lower you in their mind, they can lower the risk. But the truth, the more they try to shrink you, the more space you take up in their emotional world, and that tension becomes unbearable. That's why they come back. That's why they stay connected even when they've walked away. That's why no one else feels quite like you. So here's what you need to understand. If you've been devalued by someone who also can't stop orbiting around your energy, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you've triggered something so rare, so raw, that their internal system has gone into overload. They're afraid to lose you, but more afraid of what loving you will require them to become. Don't let their fear become your story. Stay rooted, stay grounded in your worth, because if you can hold your frame during the storm, you don't just survive their avoidance. You force them to evolve. They push you away not because you're insignificant, but because deep down, you represent everything they thought they would never be ready for. And that is the highest compliment fear will ever pay to love. One of the most counterintuitive signals that an avoidant is falling in love with you is when they begin to include you in the smallest, most mundane parts of their daily life. Not because they suddenly want to share everything, but because their nervous system is testing a new emotional reality. Avoidants don't open the door with grand gestures. They crack it slightly, and they watch. They want to see if your presence inside their daily world feels like an invasion or a sanctuary. Now, here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. For someone with avoidant tendencies, routines are sacred. They're not just habits, they're survival systems. They're rituals, they're alone time, they're personal space. These are not casual preferences. They are control mechanisms built to keep chaos at bay. So when an avoidant starts weaving you into those sacred spaces, inviting you to run errands, sharing a random meme, asking what you ate for lunch, it's not just conversation, it's experimentation. They're learning how to coexist with closeness. They're seeing if your energy can be present without demanding, if your presence can exist without consuming. They're in their mind, love is a potential threat to their independence. So instead of rushing in, they run simulations. And that's exactly what the subtle inclusions are. These aren't filler conversations, they're micro tests. You think he asks about your morning because he's bored? No, he's slowly trying to create rhythm, a new psychological rhythm that doesn't overwhelm his internal world. He's not inviting you in all at once. He's watching how you handle the hallway before showing you the rest of the house. What's deeper here is the philosophical tension between solitude and union. Avoidants live in the illusion that they must choose between the two. That loving someone means the death of the self. So when they start inviting you into routine, it means they're experimenting with a revolutionary idea. Maybe I don't have to disappear to protect my peace. Maybe I can share time, space, and decisions without losing my core. And that idea, that's terrifying for someone who's built their identity around emotional isolation. This is why it's crucial not to underestimate the small stuff. To the avoidant, small is big. The casual update about their schedule, that's them saying, I'm letting you into the structure of my world. A quick text to say, just got back from work, that's a psychological trust fall. They're trying to build a bridge, not by throwing all their weight on it, but by pressing down gently, piece by piece, to see if it holds. And here's the part most people miss. These efforts are usually followed by withdrawal, not because you did something wrong, but because they're recalibrating. Every inch of closeness they give triggers an internal alarm. Did I give too much? Did I open the gate too wide? It's a psychological pendulum. Lean in, pull back. Lean in, pull back. This is how they regulate the unfamiliar flood of intimacy. But the fact that they're swinging at all means the emotional center of gravity is shifting toward you. So don't be fooled by the subtlety. If you're part of their day-to-day, if your opinion is starting to matter in decisions they once made alone, if they check in about things that seem minor, realize what that means. It means you're not just a romantic interest anymore. You're becoming an emotional constant in a world they swore would stay private forever. It's not the big dramatic moments that reveal an avoidance love. It's the quiet integrations, the threads they start weaving between your life and theirs when they think you won't notice. Because if they can let you into their ordinary, they're preparing to let you into the extraordinary. If they're making room for you in their routine, they're also making space for you in their future. One careful, sacred step at a time. Here's where the confusion hits hardest. When an avoidant starts showing up during your silence, not with declarations, not with apologies, but with strange, almost passive signals, a reaction to your story, a song they sent randomly, a check-in that feels both casual and calculated, and it leaves you wondering, what is this? Is it emotional breadcrumbs? Or is this love trying to surface through fear? You've got to understand something critical about the psychology of avoidance. Direct vulnerability is often impossible. Their nervous system is wired for self-preservation. So when love begins to stir inside them, they rarely confront it head on. They sidestep it. They leak it. And when you go silent, when you stop initiating, stop chasing, stop rescuing, you trigger the awakening. Not because they suddenly realize they're losing someone valuable, but because your absence exposes their attachment wounds in real time. That's when they start reaching out. But not in the way secure people do. Their reach outs are coded, masked in neutrality. They'll respond to an old text like nothing happened. They'll send a meme. They'll comment on something small. Because asking directly, do you still care, would rupture their pride. What you're witnessing in these moments is emotional ambivalence. Two parts of them are fighting for control. One part wants to stay protected. The other part can't ignore what you've come to meet. And let's not overlook this. Your silence is not rejection to an avoidant. It's data. It forces them to reassess the roles. You've stopped performing the emotional labor. You're no longer filling the space. And now the very absence they once craved starts to echo. Because in the absence of your energy, their emotional intelligence doesn't grow, it activates. That activation is where love begins to surface. Not because they suddenly feel something new, but because the old strategies stop working. The distraction doesn't soothe them. The independence they clung to doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It feels like isolation. And now your voice, your laugh, your energy, it doesn't haunt them with longing, it haunts them with regret. This is the shift you need to recognize. When an avoidant begins to fear that they've lost your emotional access, they'll show up, maybe inconsistently, maybe awkwardly, maybe even coldly, but they'll show up. Why? Because love has breached their fortress. And they don't know how to confess that, so they test it instead. They'll poke at your boundary. They'll reach into your silence, not to reclaim dominance, but to see if the door is still cracked open. Philosophically, this is the ego's last stand. Their ego is trying to maintain the illusion of detachment, but their soul is waking up to the cost of disconnection. And here's what most people misunderstand. Avoidants aren't emotionless. They're emotionally exiled. Their feelings exist. They've just been locked in a vault with 10 layers of security. But when love gets in, even a crack in the system causes the whole structure to tremble. So when they reach out during your silence, you must look beyond the method and see the motive. It's not about how loud they come, it's about why they're coming at all. Their ego hates that you've gone quiet. Their heart is terrified it's permanent. And that terror, that's not weakness. That's proof that what you meant to them wasn't casual. Don't ignore the coded signals, but don't decode them for their comfort either. Let your silence continue to refine their recognition. Because here's the bottom line. If they're showing up in the silence, love is no longer something they can suppress. It's something they're starting to need. When your absence starts making more noise than your presence ever did, that's when an avoidant finally starts listening. There's a final pattern you need to look out for, subtle yet powerful. When an avoidant is in love with you, they won't just reach out, they'll start mirroring your emotional growth. They'll reflect your boundaries, your communication style, even your silence. Not as manipulation, but as unconscious adaptation. This is how transformation starts for someone who spent their entire emotional life behind walls. They won't tell you they're changing. They'll show it in the subtlest shifts, and it's up to you to discern the difference between a pattern and progress. Avoidants aren't wired to change for just anyone. Their entire identity is built on self-reliance, autonomy, and distance. But love, real confronting love, does something radical. It begins to dismantle their defenses by making avoidance too painful to maintain. That's when the mirroring starts. You said you needed space, suddenly they're offering it without the usual pushback. You begin communicating your needs more clearly, they're no longer shutting down every time emotions surface. You pulled away to heal, and now they're the ones sitting with discomfort instead of immediately seeking distractions. This mirroring isn't them trying to win you back. It's the early signs of internal reprogramming. Love has challenged their paradigm. They're realizing they can't continue operating with the same patterns and still keep access to your presence. And make no mistake, your presence has now become the oxygen they didn't know they were missing. At first, these changes may look small, but psychologically, they're seismic. They might initiate more conversations. They might take accountability, not perfectly, but sincerely. They might stop running the moment conflict appears. That's not coincidence. That's collision. The part of them that fears connection is now in direct contact with the part of them that's beginning to value it. The truth is, no avoidant rewires overnight. But love, when it's real, when it's grounded, when it refuses to beg, but doesn't stop being powerful, shakes the system. It awakens the deeper self, the self that longs to connect, the self that doesn't want to keep living behind emotional armor. And your growth becomes the blueprint. You're not teaching them with words, you're teaching them with alignment. They're watching how you handle distance, how you hold your boundaries without bitterness, how you speak truth without shaming. And suddenly, the old patterns that kept them safe start to feel outdated, even self-destructive. This is where philosophy meets psychology. What you're witnessing is the transformation of their internal narrative. They're moving from connection equals threat to connection equals potential. And when that shift begins, however slowly, you're no longer just someone they're interested in. You're the catalyst for their evolution, not because you tried to fix them, but because you were committed to being whole with or without them. And here's the most important thing to remember. Mirroring is not the end goal. It's the beginning of self-awareness. You're not waiting for perfection. You're watching for pattern disruption. You're not settling for breadcrumbs. You're identifying whether their behavior reflects real emotional growth or temporary relief from loneliness. And if the shifts are real, if they're consistent, if they align with the standards you've set, not only are they in love, but they're starting to love in a new language. So if they begin to reflect your strength, your clarity, your emotional discipline, don't dismiss it as coincidence. Pay attention. That's not mimicry, that's resonance. They're no longer resisting your influence. They're being transformed by it. When an avoidant stops reacting and starts reflecting, that's the moment love stops being a threat and starts becoming the bridge.